Toronto Star just published an article that this property got 57 offers. Why is Toronto suddenly seeing a spike in bidding wars? If you are a home buyer or a seller in the market, this might push or pull you away from wanting to do a transaction. A lot of people were taking a step back because they were fearful of what was happening in Q1 of this year, especially, and rightfully so. It caused a lot of transactions to fail. We saw a lot of appraisals coming up short. We saw a lot of people walking away from transactions, and now that's leading to litigation. People are getting sued as a result of this exuberance that we saw in the market. And I'm here today to explain to you why you don't need to worry about bidding wars heading into the fall market, heading into Q4 of 2022, simply because this headline isn't necessarily correct. We are not seeing a spike in bidding wars. We are seeing the lowest number of bidding wars that we've seen in the past 2 years happening right now. And if you're a purchaser in the market, I don't think that this is something that should scare you heading into making a transaction between now and Christmas. Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel where I go through some in-depth charts using Toronto Real Estate Board data through a platform called the Habistat to give you clarity on what is happening in the market. A couple of charts that I'm going to be presenting today are the sales price by location in the Greater Toronto Area, the sales price compared year over year, the year over year sales volume or the number of homes that we've seen sell. And then we're going to break down what percentage of that volume is selling above or below the asking price. Then we're going to look at the sale to list price ratio. This is basically a percentage of what the sold price is of what the seller was asking. And we're going to see what direction that trend is going. And then finally, we're going to look at the average days on market in the Greater Toronto Area. I love looking at data. I really think that it creates value and clarity for people who are trying to make decisions in the real estate industry. And a lot of my clients see value in it because I'm an aggregator. One of the primary functions of a real estate agent is to be an aggregator of information. My job, my fiduciary duty is to help you make a decision in your best interest. And in order to do that, in most cases, I need to give you the full scope of information. I need to give you as much information as I possibly can. And so I'm using the Habistat. You can use their Canadian Real Estate Association data on the habistat.com for free. I post those videos regularly as well, typically after the 15th of every month, which is when the Canadian Real Estate Association comes out with that data. But if you're a real estate agent in Toronto, or if you have a real estate agent in Toronto, they have access, realtors have access to a paid platform which uses the Toronto Real Estate Board's data for Toronto Real Estate Board members, so realtors who are members of the Toronto Real Estate Board, to go and look at these charts. And you can go and look at them and analyze all of these in detail if you have that license. So the first chart I'm going to be looking at today is the sales price by location in the Greater Toronto Area. I'm just going to blow this one up here so it's full screen. So what we saw obviously happen in February of 2022 was the market basically peaked. Some markets peaked a little bit later, but now we're seeing prices on a downtrend in the Greater Toronto Area. And we know that, prices are down between 20 and 30% in some areas. But what happened in July and August is the market really grinded to a halt. We weren't seeing a lot of sales, and this allowed prices to kind of settle in. Sellers were really digging their heels in. They weren't accepting lower prices. And so what we saw, and if you look towards the end of this chart, is that you can see basically the prices actually plateaued and in some cases went up. There's a little bit of bounciness there. York region being the pink line here on the average isn't necessarily a good indication just because there was some skew there, which I've discussed in past videos. But prices are settling in. I think that most of the worst price declines that we've seen are behind us. And so what we're really going to start seeing now is a slow and steady grinding down of prices as the new interest rate environment starts to take hold. And the reality is when you're in a slow and organically declining market, I think that that's a safe market for people to transact in. It's easy for people to go in and out. It's easy for people to buy and sell at the same time, and not risk the gaps that we were seeing happening in February of this year, where somebody would sell their house in February, buy a house in February and then try and sell their house in March, and it was worth significantly less than the assumption that they were making. So a lot of the risk, from my perspective, has really been pulled out of the market, has been weeded out of the market, because we're not seeing massive interest rate increases anymore. And we're not seeing massive disparities in listing and selling prices in the Greater Toronto Area. Second chart I'm going to look at now is sales price and volume comparisons between periods. I'm looking at year over year here to get an understanding to see whether or not the majority of places are down year over year. And it looks like we're finally at a point where prices are basically down on the year over year basis from September of last year. And I would expect that this is something that's going to continue to happen as we start getting into those higher prices from last year, from 2021 data, and lower prices from this year. The reality is that the real estate market is still trending in a downward direction, and it is down on a year-over-year basis. Looking at volume, this to me is one of the most important charts. Volume is the number of homes that sold in the market in a given month, and I've often referenced this, especially in regards to the Canadian Real Estate Association's volume chart, which is available on the CREA stats website. If you look back at COVID, we were trading basically at 20 to 50% above the historic average sales volume, or the historic average number of sales. And now we've settled back into what I would call a normal market. So July, August, and September of 2022 are all, you can see here on this chart, are all significantly lower than the July, August, and September sales numbers of the past 3 years. For September of 2022, we are looking at 50% lower than September of last year on the number of sales. So 50% less homes sold, half of the number of homes sold in the Greater Toronto Area in September of 2022, so September of this year versus September of last year. That's significant, because eventually, if there's not a lot of purchasers out there, and a lot of people are saying, oh, inventory is at a record low, and it is, but if there's not a lot of purchasers out there looking for homes and doing transactions as well, then we are seeing basically a market in which we could shift very quickly into a buyer's market. On the same token, volume is down from last month. So typically, if you look at the past 3 years, the lighter blue lines above, from August to September, sales volume goes up. This year, from August to September, sales volume goes down. And there hasn't really been a time in the past. I think in 2017 this happened, and 2017 would be an exceptionally bad comparable. If you know what happened in 2017 in the Greater Toronto Area, prices moved down about 40% from April to August of that year. And so 2017 was the last time we saw this happen, where volume actually went down from August, from the summer into the fall market, which is typically when we see volume ramp up. Next chart I'm going to look at is sales volume over under asking price. So this chart basically shows us how many properties are selling over asking price. And if you look at the month of February 2022, earlier this year, 87%, almost 90% of homes were selling over asking price. In March, as the first interest rate hike started to take hold and the market was rolling over, that number dropped to 84%. And then it basically continued a downtrend until basically until August of this year. So the idea of bidding wars, the number of properties that were selling in bidding wars, has been dropping for about 6 months in a row. Now all of a sudden we've reached what I would call probably the bottom of the down leg of prices in the real estate market. And we're starting to see, if you look closely here, you can see percentage above asking drop to 28.3%. So only just over a quarter of homes are selling over asking price, or you could argue just over a quarter of homes are going into bidding wars. And then in August, just almost exactly a quarter of homes went into bidding wars. And in September 26.6% of homes went into bidding wars. I want to go back and compare this to the last period of time when we saw numbers this low. So if you look back at this chart and follow this line all the way back, you can see there's a period of time where properties were always selling at over asking. Almost like basically from January 2021 until this year, properties were selling, the majority of properties were going into bidding wars. Greater than 50% of properties were going into bidding wars. The last time we were below that number, and the last time we were as low as where we are right now, was in April of 2020, when we were in the first lockdown from the global pandemic. 26.8% of properties at that period of time were selling above asking price. And the next month, May 2020, when we were coming out of that lockdown, people really had no idea what was happening in the market, 27.2%. So we're at a market where, on the bidding war perspective, the amount of bidding wars that we're seeing is comparable to a period of time where there was a mass uncertainty in the market and the market was functionally locked down. People literally couldn't trade real estate. So the comparison and the idea that you're hearing in the Toronto Star here, returning to this article, why is Toronto suddenly seeing a spike in bidding wars? Well, the reality is, to answer that question, we aren't. There isn't a spike in bidding wars happening. If you're calling a jump from 25.5% to 26.6% a spike, which is basically a half a percentage point increase, then I guess that's, I would imagine there's a little bit of sensationalism here in this article. I would not call that a spike. And especially knowing that in the past 3 months, we've basically traded at below 30%. So less than a third of properties are going into bidding wars. I don't think that it's something that purchasers need to worry about. I don't think you need to worry about the market going into majority bidding wars within the foreseeable future. Finally, going to look at the sale to list price ratio here. This is another indication of whether or not properties are going into bidding wars. So if you go back to February of this year, when the market was primarily dominated by bidding wars, or if you go back to the beginning of when this crazy bull run and exuberance starting in July of 2021, sale to list price ratio started at over 100% at that period of time. And then it basically continued going all the way up to, it peaked at 118.8% on average. So on average, homes were selling 20% almost over asking price. And then once we hit that point in February, that number just started to decrease on the same trajectory that the percentage of properties selling over asking decreased. So it dropped to just over 100% in June, which is basically a point in which sellers and buyers have agreed on that the asking price is correct on average. And then it actually crossed below that 100% threshold, and now properties are selling below asking price on average. They're selling at 98% of asking price on average right now in the Greater Toronto Area for the past 3 months. So on average, we know that less than 1/3 of properties are going into bidding wars, and on average, properties are selling below their asking price in the Greater Toronto Area. So I don't think it is something to be fearful or worrisome about when you hear that bidding wars are seeing a spike in the Greater Toronto Area, because quite simply, the data doesn't tell us that that is true. Last chart I'm going to show you here today, folks. This is from the back end of Broker Bay, which is what real estate agents use to book showings, to register offers, and to communicate offers back and forth with one another. They have this really cool analytics tool, and basically you can see that in Toronto in February, the week of February 13th of this year, we had 2,800 offers put out, and basically the number of offers has been on a steady decline since then, if you follow that line, to the point where in September, last week of September, we saw 927 offers. So basically a third of the number of offers that we saw in February of this year. So don't get me wrong, we are seeing some bidding wars happening in the market, but by no means have we reached a point where we're going back to the bidding war situation that we were seeing in February of this year or in Q1 of 2022.